government is a product of the contract. Have you ever had a contract yet where the product of the contract got to change the deal? I was in construction for 28 years. I never had a house building contract where the wood got to change its price after the fact. The signatories to the contract are in charge of the contract, not the product. The product is enumerated by Article 1, Section 8, and by the 9th and the 10th Amendment. The powers in the Constitution that the government is allowed to use are regulate commerce, establish rules for naturalization, make and coin money, punish counterfeiters, build post offices, promote progress of science, constitute tribunals to the inferior courts, define and punish pirates, dictate and grant letters of marque, and so on and so forth. Nowhere in there does it say that the federal government has the right to restrict your access to property that's within your state. And once again, that law came about after the fact. The Federal Forest Management Act, I think it was, under Theodore Roosevelt and later affirmed by Woodrow Wilson. But there are no Article 1, Section 8 powers that allow the government to take those actions. They have usurped that power. And a state with the state backbone to stand up for the federal government can demand one thing from the federal government, that they follow the letter of their own laws. And that would limit about 90% of the intrusion into state affairs. And there are some precedents for that. Otero County, New Mexico, directed the sheriff to entertain requests for proposals to log the national forest down to the national forest plan, they weren't breaking the law, and to arrest any federal officer that intervened in that process. And they did that. And they now have 2 mills operating, and people that have jobs in their communities aren't in danger from catastrophic wildfire. I saw the Happy Camp fire start. It was started out as one snag. I called the United States Forest Service incident commander and reported the fire, and he did nothing. And 150,000 acres later, the fire basically went out by itself. That's what federal management did for our forest. It cost jobs. We were literally carrying people out of their houses while their neighbors' houses were on fire. I've seen some of the fire on the way in here. That's not good. And we can do better than that as a small state with local jurisdiction and local control. Now, I believe that Otero County was later sued by the Department of the Interior for those activities. And we're following very closely how that suit turns out. The Western Lands Council, led by the state of Utah, has passed legislation demanding the turnover of federally managed lands because the Western problem lands, as they were called, were originally entrusted to the United States government on behalf of each state. And the intent was that as the trustee, when states entered the Union, those lands would be disposed of for productive exploration, population, and occupancy by the people of those states. Well, the federal government changed the contract after the fact. And the Western Lands Council, that has 9 states on board now, is making a serious legal run at limiting federal intrusion into the lands of their states. And it looks pretty good for them. Those are the principles upon which Jefferson could limit federal intrusion to the highest degree the law allows. Once again, we're not breaking trail, we're not trying to break the law, we're not trying to create law. This is all legal precedent. Another reason we can do this is because of the equal footing doctrine. Pollard versus Lassen, which was an Alabama case, where when Alabama entered the Union, the United States government decided after the fact in their enabling legislation that they were going to keep all of the tidelands and all of the revenue derived from those tidelands because Pollard was leasing those lands for fishing, and it was a pretty lucrative deal. Well, the Supreme Court said, no, 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 no. When you allow a state into the Union, it has equal sovereignty with the original 13 states. There isn't one state out of the original 13 that has huge federal reserves with huge federal intrusion into how their citizens and their local governmental agencies interact with those lands. Not one. The latest was Oklahoma's Enabling Act, where it said Oklahoma enjoyed sovereignty equal to the original 13 states. John Adams and James Madison and Thomas Jefferson alike all said, if you allow states into the Union on a lesser level than the original 13, why would they want to join? Why would you want to be a second-tier state? No one would do it. The Enabling Act of California guarantees us equal sovereignty with the original 13. So we have the sovereignty, right? We don't use it. And a liberty unexercised is a liberty lost. The state of Jefferson that we propose guarantees the rights of the individual, their rights of property, and their right to use that property to make a living for themselves and their families. It guarantees local control. We want a part-time legislature. We have a lot of tax ideas. For example, instead of the state franchise tax board collecting property taxes, you collect them. And then you send the state the part that they need to operate on. Instead of your citizens sending the state that money, and then they decide how much of it you're going to get back. Some of those schemes, for example, in it was Tehama County, the CAO asked me, well, what can we do to increase revenue? That was an easy one for them. I said, you have a tremendous amount of water that passes through this county to which your citizens have no access and derive no benefit. Why don't you hang a $200 an acre foot water transfer fee on that? And that way Westland's Water has to pay for the water that it turns around and sells to Los Angeles for $5,000 an acre foot or whatever it is. We have a lot of revenue generating ideas that don't impact the taxpayer. Okay, you have a large number of state employees in Lassen County. One thing they're worried about is, what about my pension? What about CalPERS? This is very important. No one in the state of Jefferson wants anybody's pension. No one. Least of all me. I am a cop. I understand what it is to have a murderer in the back of your car and only make $14 an hour. I mean, Siskiyou County has the lowest paid deputies in the state of California, in my opinion. I don't know if that's true, but it's pretty close. So I don't want any part of the state that takes somebody's pension. I don't. The honorable thing to do is, when an employee has a contract, you honor the contract. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about creating a contract that people honor after the fact. If it's expensive, so what? We'll have to figure that out. Because as honorable people with integrity, we honor the contracts that have been written. And we honor them to the letter and to the spirit in which they were negotiated. Now, if we sever our ties from California now or shortly, the debt is manageable. And our figures show that. If we wait 20 years, it probably can't be done. Once we get to $4 or $5 trillion, even our 3% of it won't be manageable. But right now, it's about $560 million a year for the next 40 years, and then we're off the hook. And with a balanced budget amendment, we'll never be on that hook again. What we propose to do is, if we make changes on a state level to employee compensation packages, it will be by attrition. In other words, if a guy retires out, he retires with his pension, he takes his money, and he goes fishing. And that's the way it should be. If we have new compensation packages, a new employee is free to look at that package, and he's free to choose whether it's enough for him or not. And I propose that that be designed as a defined contribution package instead of a defined benefit. That way you can budget for it. County employees will know. When I joined World Airways, almost 40 years ago, on my very first day in orientation, they handed me a document, and it had how much money I'd have in my retirement account the day I retired, give or take, a couple $1,000. And had the company survived, it wouldn't have been too far off. Now, as it was, they went broke and stole my pension. But, you know, you can't be a sissy about that. That's what's happening. I'm not sorry about my life or complaint, but what I'm saying is we can avoid those mistakes, and it's easy to do so. By honoring these contracts and beginning pension contribution packages that can be budgeted for, we're not going to find ourselves in that position again. Someone else, the other argument is, it's just too hard, it can't be done. I remember my dad telling me a story about Jimmy Doolittle, who was standing on the deck of the Hornet in some of the worst weather you could imagine with 88 20-year-olds. And they were about to take off for Tokyo, and they'd just been seen by a Japanese trawler 2 days before they planned to take off. They knew they had to go or they wouldn't make it, but they also knew they didn't have enough fuel to come back. They went on a one-way mission. They knew it. Not a single one of those guys went below deck. They took off anyway. You know, Patrick Henry and Samuel Adams were some of the leaders of the revolution, and Samuel is a pretty edgy guy. I'm sure his brother was telling him, Samuel, you don't have to speak off the cuff every time we go on a meeting. But Sam Adams said something that's very interesting. If you value your safety than your money more than your liberty, if you value security more than the animating contest of freedom, then get down on your knees and lift the hand that feeds you. We need your counsel or your reverence. May your change rest lightly upon you, and may we forget that you were ever called our countrymen. I've got an old dog. He's a great dog, and I love him. But he's about 15. He never gets too far from the table because he knows where the strap comes from. And that's what we have in the state of California right now. The rural counties of California are the dogs chained to the table, and we can count on a few table scraps. It's never really enough to give us too much liberty, but it's always enough to keep us close to the table. And you know you're free. You are. You live in a free country. If the chain is 20 feet long and all you ever do is walk 16 feet, you're as free as a bird. But the minute you hit 20 feet, you know how short that chain is. Gasoline taxes, carb, chicken laws, potty laws, ridiculous things that government should never entertain are our lot in life unless we do this now. And I'll close and give you time for questions. My mother, in junior high, she made me take a typing class. And I was really mad. I thought, God, I'm going to have to sit there with a bunch of girls and learn how to type. But as I was banging away on those keys, and by the way, it's the best thing she ever made me do, and I'm really grateful to her now, but I was banging away on those keys, and one thing we used to type over and over again is, now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their country. You know, I've been all over the world. I've been to every socialist heaven you can imagine in 6 different wars. I've been to the Democratic People's Republic of Congo. I watched 2 guys kill each other over a quart of orange juice one time. And it was my fault. I thought I was giving them something they wouldn't get, and they were going to sell it to the other guys instead of sharing. And there was a fight that required an ambulance by the time it was over. But I didn't realize that some people are so denied and so deprived of their liberty that they'll go to any lengths to recover it. I really didn't realize that. The one thing I realized in those places, people's lives work where they have direct representation. People's lives don't work where they have none. And liberty will find its way eventually. Sometimes it's ugly, but it finds its way. The difference between constitutional republic and tyranny is easy. I've already told you what constitutional republic looks like. Every tyrannical government shares the same quality, and it's one quality. You wake up in the morning and you ask yourself, what is the government going to do to me today? What kind of government do we have in California? And what kind of government would you like to see happen? That's what the state of Jefferson represents. And by the way we've chosen to do this is by declaration. The declaration means nothing. It doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to direct any county agency to do anything they're not doing now. You don't have to study anything or pay for anything. This is a movement of the people, paid for by the people. Tom and I pay for our own gas and our own hamburger everywhere we go. We don't have any sponsors, political, corporate, or otherwise. Someone asked me about the Koch brothers. I don't know them, but if anybody knows their address, we could use a little help. You know? But the point is that the declaration itself doesn't cost your county anything. It doesn't cause any action. This is simply an affirmation so that the people can take this forward under an Article 4, Section 3 process. It also buys you a seat at the table when representation is discussed in the legislature or in court. And we already have enough counties to do that. This discussion will take place. The only question is, will you be at the table when it does? I'm not here to tell you how to live. You don't need that. I'm here to ask you a question. Is the Constitution of the state of California the truth or a lie? And what is it that you would like to do about that going forward? Are you happy with California as a business partner? And if you're not, we have a plan. There was a short article in your newspaper, and I just want to address a couple of these things. I try to play by adult rules. That means if something sounds so stupid it can't be true, it probably isn't, but I'll answer some of these. All of the students in the state of Jefferson would be forced to spend out-of-state tuition if they went to California. Stan Statham's legislation in 1992, he worked out a deal where both states would have in-state tuition no matter which university the people of those states went to. For example, Jefferson has a level 1 post academy. We get students up there from Los Angeles all the time. They would not have to pay out-of-state tuition. We can bargain with California and make sure all of our students get everything they need. Why the Jefferson name? It smacks of racism. The name Jefferson came from Thomas Jefferson, obviously, Because when he made the Louisiana Purchase, which gained the United States half of its territory, people were so thrilled about that acquisition of territory that they tremendously admired Thomas Jefferson for the purchase. And there were probably 5 or 6 states that all wanted the name Jefferson shortly thereafter because of the Louisiana Purchase. That's where the name Jefferson comes from. It doesn't have anything to do with watering the tree of liberty with the blood of patriots or any of the stuff that people imagine. It's simply a historical reference to the Louisiana Purchase. Losing state funding. All states have funding. California has funding. When West Virginia broke away from Virginia, they still had a state, they still had a road department, they still had funding. When Massachusetts broke away from Maine, they still had state funding because they were a state. All states have the same state funding. All states receive money from the federal government. Your Social Security won't be affected if you move from California to Idaho, you still get Social Security. If you move from California to Idaho, you still get CalPERS. None of that stuff is going to change just because we change boundary line and the naming. Oh, here's a good one. Balkanization. If we break the state of California in half, the next thing you know, all the states are going to want to break it in half. Well, there's a reason this hasn't been done in 150 years. The Constitution is a great document. It's probably one of the best things ever written by geniuses because it is very difficult to do things to change it. And the Article 4, Section 3 process is a legally simple statement, but in practice it's not very simple to do. Now, it needs doing here. It demands doing here. We must do it here or we won't survive. But I don't think all states are in danger of breaking into bits just because we do it. And Article 3, Section 4 has been done before. A fixed amount of representatives. Won't we lose representation in Jefferson? The answer to that is no. The answer to that is that as we pass through the decades with a fixed number of representation, our vote is diluted every single day. We started out in 1872 with about 300,000 people, and your vote was worth 1. Your vote is now worth 0.001. We believe in the Reynolds Court, they took the wrong remedy. Instead of fixing representation along proportion lines, they should have expanded representation so that all counties had some. And if we are ignored in the state of California, and let's face it, we're not children, that's possible, we could go down there with 15 counties and they could just look the other way. And guess what? They can, because once again, they have 114 representatives and we have 6. We're going to sue them for dilution of vote and lack of representation. And we can do that because we have the worst representative ratio in the entire country. And it's 4 times worse than the next worst state, which is Texas, at 1 million for state senator and 500,000 for assembly person. Remember, George Washington said 1 for 30 is democracy and 1 for 40,000 is tyranny. And if we force the correct remedy on the state because we created harm, they ignored us, we have standing, you sign the declaration, there's standing and there's harm, the remedy is to expand representation. Now let's say we were able to do that in court. And at the very least, we end up with California where every county has a state assemblyman, and we have one for, say, 30,000 or 40,000 people. That's about 1,000 state assemblymen. I don't think California would work any better under that system. So their remedy would be to negotiate with us and allow us to separate peacefully, and then we won't yank the rug out from under their representative model. How would they win? This has to be a win for them. They can concentrate all their political power, keep their vast resources, and solve problems we don't even know about. I mean, large infrastructure, big urban problems, gang problems, all those things. We know how we win. We can create an environment where business is welcome, where our children can afford to stay. We can reduce taxes and increase business and adhere to all of the fiscally responsible policies that we know work. That's how the state of Jefferson would win. Thank you very, very much. The time has come for 51. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we're going to take questions from the public first, I guess.
Yeah, I think I've heard you before, and if I remember correctly, you said that basically, let's say there were 12 counties involved, that those counties would basically stay the same. Is that correct?
County lines will not be changed at all, because it's your county's legal description that defines your standing in any action we take. So yeah, counties are still going to be counties. They're not going to change at all.
Okay, so, and then the other thing has to do with, let's say, prisons and or state universities.
Yeah.
How are those handled?
Well, those are going to be handled the same way they're handled in California. You have state universities, we have post academies, we have junior colleges, we have prisons. Those will be funded much the same way they're funded in California, and they'll be handled. Although we had a PhD who's in charge of the education system for Yuba County, their junior college system and so on, and he said he got up and spoke at our presentation in Yuba County. And he wasn't planning on it. He just felt compelled, and he stood up and he said, you know, there is a tremendous amount of fraud, waste, and abuse in the California education system. We spend more per student than any other state in the union, but we have the 47th lowest test scores of all the states in the union. He said there is a tremendous opportunity here to create an education system that has local boards of education in charge and where we put the money where it belongs, in the classroom.
Okay, my last question is, have you
And
modeled...
by the way, K through 12 is on the model that the supervisors have in front of them.
Okay. Have you sort of modeled things after a state like Oklahoma or Wyoming?
No, we're not modeling this after any state like Oklahoma or Wyoming.
Next question. Mrs. Spencer.
This board exists by California codes. Would they, when they're in the state of Jefferson, because they sit here, all 5 of them sit here by California codes, would then they just disappear and we have to re-elect?
Absolutely not. No, see, the irony is that, in other words, in the state of California, and this is one thing that Justice Warren, that's a good question. In Justice Warren, in Reynolds versus Sims, he claimed his authority because the county was not a legal subdivision of a state. And that's absolutely patently false. You have a real estate description called a legal description of this county. If you have a legal description of the property contained within this county, the county is a legal entity, otherwise the meets and bounds wouldn't be required. In other words, we're asking ourselves, why do we need a government of California, or why do we need a county government? Why aren't we just all citizens of the United States? The reason for that is because, as Alex de Tocqueville said when he wrote Democracy in America, he said the greatest form of government known to man is the township or the county in Old English. Because the representative are people that you can look in the eye. There will be no change to your county government, none whatsoever, unless the people in this room and this board decides that there needs to be some. The point is not to change the county.
I don't think that's correct.
Well, how could it not be correct?
In California law.
Yes, in California's
California
Constitution.
Now is no longer.
But it doesn't mean everybody.
A state of Jefferson government code to allow us to elect our county?
Your county structure wouldn't change at all. Article 2, Section 1 of the California Constitution says all just power is derived from the people, and the people have the right to alter or abolish that form of government when it fails to serve them. What we're proposing to do is a legal process that's been done before. Believe me, when Maine separated from Massachusetts, their governmental entities did not disappear. Their governmental entities participated in the change and remained in full force until the new state constitution was voted upon, and at that time they continued governing. Just because we create a state doesn't mean everybody disappears until it's finished.
Okay. We have, Lassen County has a $120 million budget, which probably looks pretty good to the other budgets you would acquire. But we stay afloat by the welfare we get from the state of California to run our health and human services programs for the sheriff. The rest of the revenue comes from the prisons. You don't own, and you never will own, the prisons if this
That's
is no
not true.
longer.
The state's Attorney General's opinion, you can look at it, so it's not my opinion, you can read it in the Legislative Analyst's Office report for the Six States Initiative. The state's Attorney General says that all assets of the former state of California within the boundaries of the new state belong to the new state. Because remember, we were Californians
That's
when
not
those
what it
things,
says.
that's exactly what
I
it
have
says.
read it, and that's not.
That is what it says.
You are a nice person, and I can see why people listen to you. This.
Well, excuse me, then what does it say then?
You're a nice person, but this is a very old concept, and it raises its head
Every generation.
Every generation. And it's never going to pass, and I think you know it will never pass.
Why would I be here if I didn't get out?
It will never pass.
That's enough. Let her speak. Let her speak. That's enough.
Your revisionist history was entertaining. It really was. But, and you're a nice person.
Well, I invite you to correct me where I'm wrong, but I'm not.
We have a percentage in this county that are vulnerable to scams like the state of Jefferson. It really is just a scam.
She has the right to speak.
Yeah, it's a
Well,
reoccurring scam.
I will say this, and my father said it many times, and his father said it again, and I had an ancestor say it at Antietam Creek. I disagree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. Thank you. Is there a question there somewhere?
No,
Thank you, Mrs. Pensley, and attitude, Chair. Anybody else? See nobody, bring it back to the board. What's the motion of the board to the staff? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see.
Kind of a follow-up on her points. Isn't most of the cost that the town has to pay imposed by the state of California?
That's another thing. Constitutionally, you can bar the unfunded mandate. We have so much opportunity to fix the mistakes that California has made. And we can do a great many things are possible if we have our own state. None of those things are possible if we maintain the status quo. None of them. Because we don't have the representation to change anything that affects our lives. That's why we're here.
That's what I mean. Wouldn't we get rid of a lot of the cost problems we have when we separate from the
Yes.
state of California and all the
300 or 400 state agencies among them.
So we would have more money
That's right. We imagine a constitution with a part-time legislature. That would save a tremendous amount. In other words, a state with 1.2 million people would be much leaner and much less expensive to govern. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No?
My name is Wendy Reynolds, and I just have one really simple question. How soon can we get this done? Because we really need
In this state, we need to follow those laws. They're the laws, and the same with the federal government. And that the deadline for introducing legislation in the state of California, the bill has to be fleshed out by February 27th. We're not going to submit this year. We have talked about it, but we want every county, and once again, I'm not here to tell you how to live. I'm here asking you a question and asking this board a question. Because if you don't want a state of Jefferson, God bless you and good luck with California, but we're moving on. And so we're going to submit our legislation in January or February of 2016 because we want every county that wants the opportunity to join us to have that opportunity. So the window's going to close around January 30th of 2016, and we will be submitting legislation after that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Question turning back.
How many counties are online or are asking for you to come and talk to them?
We have 6 counties that have signed declarations or resolutions, and by the way, this is an open document. Your county council can review it. You can change anything you want in there. You can change it to say whatever you want. There are only a few important statements that create the standing. We declare a petition to withdraw because of lack of representation. That's important because it establishes your standing in court challenge. And by the way, you're not going to be asked for money to pay for the court fight. That's the responsibility of the people. And the other important thing is the legal description of the county so that we can define the area that has standing. Everything else in the middle, for example, Siskiyou counties are different, problems are different. Trinity County's problems, are different from Lassen County. So if you want to change that to reflect Lassen County's situation, you can do whatever you want in there. There are only three things that are important: declaration and petition because of lack of representation, and the legal description. That's it. The rest of it is open for you to change. For example, this is about representation and nothing else. Sutter County changed theirs to add a clause at the end that if the state of Jefferson becomes an imminent possibility, they're going to put it on the ballot so people can vote whether they want to join the state or not. If you want out of this at the last minute, all it takes is a majority of this board to get yourselves out of it. This is not something to try to compel you to do something you don't want. It's to allow you to do something that you may want to do.
Good, thank you.
And we have 20 counties we're talking to right now. 20